So I'm Thierry and this is Tsuchen, and we have Rachel over there with our video camera holding. So three of us are on the residency at Double Space and we are part of my team. So Tsuchen will introduce a bit more about Methodist.
So Methodist was started in 2018. It was really casual. So a group of us, mainly writers, came together to start casual creating online. Yeah, so what we did was poetry challenges. So if you know things like Singapore Write More, yeah, it's something like that, but in Mandarin. Yeah, so over the years Methodist evolved. So we evolved into experimenting with text and many other mediums like film, performance, object. And then we found this organic way of working, and then we're interested in the unintelligible and undefined. Yeah, so we like to play with things.
Yeah. Okay. So that's about Methodist. So actually for our residency here, before our residency we actually had this production called Selected Voices that had a lot of compositions and therapy. So basically this was a theatre production whereby there was 8 different plays related to mental health that we put up. And then from there, 2 of the plays we kind of extended to our residency here to make it, to extend beyond. So we are looking at similar themes, but then we're extending beyond just the format of a play. So yeah, which is what we'll be sharing today. So in September last year, when we did our residency at Double Space, we were focusing mainly on 2 different topics. One is crying in public spaces, and the other one is about sex workers in Singapore. And we were very interested in the invisibility and these 2 kind of communities' relationship with spaces. And yeah, so we just decided, a group of us who really didn't do any installation or visual arts things before, just decided to come into this space and see what would happen. So yeah, so I did more of the crying in public spaces, which I'll be sharing a bit more about my experiences here and things like that, and then later on Tsuchen will be sharing more about the sex workers in Singapore. So the problem that I had in the space was really when was the last time you cried? And what I realized is that just by asking people this very simple question, a lot of times everyone has very mixed responses. So some people would just sit there and think for a while and really cannot remember. But some of them were oh, just now, when I was around some streets, I started crying and things like that. So it made me really think a lot about this is such a simple yet very loaded question. And so from this prompt, it really led me to think about movies, films, and songs. How do we make this kind of thing more accessible? So yeah, because I think sometimes it's very hard to talk about emotions, why do you cry and things like that. But I realized that if we use mediums like movies, maybe I say, oh, this movie made me cry a lot, and then people start talking about it, and it actually opens up a lot of conversations for emotions and things like that. So that was one of the things that I kind of realized. And yeah, and I think also because I put this in the space, so I also remembered certain people who came in and people that I didn't know, they were very willing to share. So just from a simple action of crying, really went into other things where I talked about I remember one conversation about how she said that she recalled about the time with her father when the father at the funeral didn't cry at all. And she started thinking a lot about it and started reflecting about it. So it really also made me think about how just very simple or small actions actually draws to a bigger network of issues and things like that. So so why do a work about crying in public spaces, right? So I think at first I also wondered is this even something that people are curious about? Is it even a thing? But then I still decided to go into it, and it's really through stories, observations, or fears that people have with crying. So things so when I collect a lot of information from people, when people say, oh, my boss today in the workplace started crying, how can this be, kind of thing. There's a lot of mixed emotion. They're oh, on one hand, I understand that my boss is going through a hard time, but bosses have a professional stance, so how can they cry? So things about these things really make me think a lot about how people's relationship with crying is. The idea of policing our tears, sometimes, so at what age do you stop crying? Or at what age is crying not allowed? How about the appropriateness of tears? At what spaces crying is actually allowed, and who actually polices such things? So yeah, these are some of the things that I got very curious about before starting this piece of work, and so that was why I decided to dive into this angle. Yeah, so just a little bit more about it. So before this I did like a play about like crying, people who couldn't cry versus people who keep crying a lot, right? And then from that experience, what I brought to this space was really trying to go back to the basics of what is crying about. So it's a lot about self-soothing. It's a natural way of like how they soothe and regulate themselves, but then it's a very intimate response. But then there's also this like external perception, like shame that is tied to this response. So some people start to feel like, oh, why I want to cry but then I cannot, and things like that. And I also thought a lot about like reshaping healing spaces, or just spaces for people to let go of their emotions and things like that. So, so what I did at this particular exhibition was, it's not just about tears and crying, but to me it's about emotions. It's about talking about emotions, holding space for emotions, but through this lens of like using tears and just crying. And also, so in the space, I tried to put in prompts for allow people who come in to reflect about their relationship emotions. And yeah. And so one aspect is really to allow like members of the public to come in to really map out safe spaces that people are able to access their tears. So this is not just physical spaces, but also like movies, films, books, which are actually like virtual or like another space that people are able to lend themselves in to access their emotions. And it was quite interesting when people who I never met before, they just pass by and they come here and then they start to scribble like, oh, you know, this is where I used to cry. And then after a while we realize that, oh, it's actually quite similar, even though these people are from all sorts of places. And then the kind of space that I tried to curate and create in this area was very messy, crumbly, so there's a lot of toilet rolls and things like that. Because yeah, toilet roll is actually quite an interesting object whereby people used to cry, it's very intimate. You just keep unrolling the idea, it looks very therapeutic and things like that. So this was some of the things that I tried to do. And yeah, and so I remember one of like my friend who came over, she looked at the piece and she was just like, you know, we need a mass crying session, especially after these 3 years. Like she said that, oh, it is relatable because she felt that everyone just needed this space to like cry. And so yeah, and it made me think a lot. And I think, so when I first started the exhibition, it was really to map out or like to share like what my research and explorations were, as well as to allow people to respond to it. But then, what I really like cherished a lot for this whole thing was when so I had a problem that when was the last time you cried, and people started writing on like this toilet rolls and paste it on the paper. So after like 3 days, when you look from far, there's like so many, not a lot, but there were quite a number of like people sharing their experiences of when they last cried, and visually it really looks like a community crying together, but at different points in time. So it was like they just came in, they left their tears on the wall, and then they left, and then at the end of the day you could see that there were so many people who were healing, crying, putting their emotions on the wall, being vulnerable, and these people, some of them I really didn't know who they were, but then they were so willing to just share. So then one of the other like public member came in to talk about like this, like, you know, we need to cry together. The power of like this collective crying is very powerful, and that's why there's this that I put here. And so to reimagine, like, so I was also thinking about like during my experience here, because I wanted a mass crying session. So I had a crying card whereby we kind of screen like a movie, like a film thing that's very sad. So to allow people to cry. And I think what I reflected from this experience was sometimes like it's not just about just talking about difficult things then to make people to cry, but just something that is sad, allow people to cry, they feel better, they feel that they have a space to hold them, they don't really need to talk much, and then they leave the space. And this, I think, is like a small attempt to create this kind of environment. And yeah. So yeah, so I think the last point is like what I mentioned about like I started off really wanting to explore more about crying and emotions, but then as I continued like my time here is really transformed into a space, be it a very transient one for people to just like sit with their emotions and then just leave. Yeah, and so there's this, so my last two slides, so this CCTV, I put it over here is because I feel that in Singapore there's really a lot of surveillance. So where are spaces that you can really like feel your emotions, like spaces that hold your emotions, and how can we create these spaces like instead of just a lot of like surveillance. So there's a lot of talks. There used to be, and now there's like talks about placemaking. How do we like make places for certain things? But how then do we make places that can hold emotions? Like, is it just about emotional literacy? Yeah, how do we create and regulate this space? And how do we make this holding of space accessible? So emotions and placemaking. Oh, I realized I didn't introduce myself, so also like because I come from apart from doing I do more theatre movement things, not visual arts or installations, and another of my day job is to do more mental health practices. So for me, mental health psychology is something that I am very passionate about. So I think these few years I've been trying to mishmash these two areas. And so I think for me, talking about emotions, placemaking, how do you do it creatively, it's something that I'm trying to go into. And that's why I think for me, when I look at placemaking and human emotions, it's very interesting because there are a lot of very cold spaces. I'm looking at the CCTV kind of thing. So how do we then transform this space as an artist? And yeah, so I think this is an area that I'm curious to continue going into. And I think the last one, so after doing this residency, it reminded me of this friendship bench, which I'm not sure whether you all ever heard of. So in Zimbabwe, there's this friendship bench. It started off by a psychiatrist, so because this is more related to mental health, whereby the access to mental health care is quite low there. So there's this psychiatrist who's like, no, it needs to be accessible. So the psychiatrist actually created this bench in the town, and they actually asked grandmothers to go there. They teach very simple CBT skills, which is teach them how to regulate their emotions, just creating a safe space for them to talk. So these are all grandmothers who live in this town, this village. They'll just sit there, and then when people need to talk to them, they will just go to the bench and then they will have a conversation and talk. So it is really to bridge this gap of mental health care in a very creative way. So I think when I did this residency or just this few months of exploration into this thing, it really reminded me of this friendship bench of how I wish that someday I'll be able to create something a space that is similar to this, but yeah, that's more widespread, and yeah, I'm still thinking about it. So yes, thank you for my presentation. Oh my god! So what's the share with the shit?
Took up 10 minutes. Actually, let me 50. Okay, so while she's having a very intimate space over there, I have this very loud wall that talks about sex work. Yeah, so I think when it comes to sex work or when I think about this, I think it started off from a very activist point of view, or I think my first step was to understand activism in sex work. Yeah, so so why sex work, or what sparked the choice of sex work? I think it mainly came from COVID. So during COVID, there was the H2B cluster thingy, and then I realized that it wasn't only that. A lot of people around me, or even myself, I was considering whether I should do sex work because I'm young, and I'm a girl, and I'm poor, I'm an artist, no plays were going on, so people were jobless, and yeah, it's not only artists also, a lot of young people were thinking about sex work because I think the online community for sex work is the community of sex workers were transitioning from physical spaces to online, especially with COVID. Yeah. So it wasn't only me, it was my friends who were contemplating every day whether this is an option for them. Yeah. So why this entire thing started was really because of this. Yeah. So with sex work, I think my practice is I started out as an actor, yeah, but recently I'm more interested in creating works. So yeah, and I think this is the first work, or the first topic, or the first thing that I create, yeah, in depth, yeah. So when we think about sex work in Singapore, if we look online, I think these are the more recent issues that comes with sex workers, and sex workers transitioning online, trouble with sex workers and police, scamming and sex work. Yeah, these are a lot of things that are happening now. Yes. Yeah. So to me, there's an urgency in terms of talking about this, and I realized that this community is actually very vulnerable. So before I worked in Double Space, as Siri mentioned, we did another work, which was at Goodman Art Center, and this was a very short play about sex workers. So what I wanted to do was, from COVID, from the starting point at COVID, then I started reading more about sex work advocacy overseas. Yeah, and I started reading about sex work advocacy in Singapore, which is Project X. So they are the only organization that helps sex workers in Singapore. And then I had a lot of things. It was very, very messy because I realized activism in Singapore is still starting. That's why the number of issues that surround sex work is actually it's really, really very messy. Yeah. So if you want to ask me about my thoughts, it's in a mess. So yeah, but after forcing myself to write a script and performing it, I realized that the keywords that I wanted to focus on was invisibility. So how sex workers are driven invisible, because this is a social community. So even if I do sex work, it's unlikely that I'll tell my mom that I'm doing sex work, or it's unlikely that I tell my friend. Yeah, so this is a theme for me, the invisibility of this. I think what's so dangerous about invisibility is that because sex workers are always experiencing, they are vulnerable to violence and a lot of injustice like robbery, assault. When they have no place to go because no one knows about their identity, it becomes very detrimental to them. Yeah, especially when you talk about mental health. Yeah, it's not physical, but it's also very mental. Yeah, so as an artist, self-intro. I just started out actually, I just ended school, so I just started freelancing. I only knew that I was going to freelance last year, so I had this identity crisis. And then I think somehow when I'm also interested in community arts, so creating works that are maybe socially conscious, but I'm not prepared to engage with communities yet. Yeah, so this is really my starting point. Yeah, and I had training from I spent time with drama box for a while, so their works really inspire me. Yeah, so coming out as a freelance person, yeah, so these are the questions that I had when I started out this work. So how ready is the audience? Yeah, when we talk about sex work, because it took me a long time. It took me about 1 year to understand activism about sex work. So when a person walks into a space, it's just a few minutes, it's just a fleeting 40 minutes. How much are we expecting, or how should I position myself so that people don't feel alienated? Yeah, so these questions how ready is something that I don't know, no one knows, because actually no one knows how ready we are to talk about sex work, because there isn't surveys or statistics. Yeah, so that was something that I was struggling with. Yeah, and yeah, what am I trying to do is also a question that I ask myself now. Yeah, so I have all these mapping, research, and all that. So, but ultimately, what's the action of that? Yeah. Okay. So another thing that I struggle with is who am I talking to? Because I mentioned that I came from a theatre background. So when we watch plays, we don't understand who comes into the space. So we don't really know our audience, and because audiences leave, we also don't get to talk about hi, where do you come from? Why do you watch this show? Actually, how do you feel about the show? You know, be pressured to say I hate it. Yeah. So the who is also something that I struggle a lot. Yeah, and also the question about who am I to create this? Yeah, so that was bothering me all the time. Yeah, until now it still bothers me. Yeah, and so moving on. Okay, so maybe we talk about double space first. Okay, when we mentioned about when I was trying to pitch the idea of sex work, talking about sex work in the space, then I was very anxious because oh my god, what if people hate this concept and they destroy this space, and this space is not mine. Yeah, so there was this very huge concern. And how do I hold space? What is considered holding space for difficult conversations? What has to be in place for this? So because as art collectives in Singapore, we don't own spaces. Because the space just doesn't belong to artists. So this is actually our first time inhabiting a space. And so that was what we were all struggling with, especially with this topic. I think the stakes of how to use space just shot up. Yeah. And what I figured later on was that actually a lot of audiences that come in don't know us. So they are very different from the usual theatre community. So when we do shows in theatre, the people who watch our plays who are usually our friends. Yeah, and the people who know us. But then as double space, like because they are embedded in Peninsula, so the people who walk by don't really know. So a lot of walk-ins actually don't know, are not artists, they know nothing about art. They just find it interesting and very curious. That's why they walked in. Yeah, and I think the most exciting conversations actually happen there. Yeah, so in a sense, actually, this wouldn't have been possible in the theatre space. Yeah, so that was what I valued most in this residency. So yeah, okay, so take one step back. Okay, so how did I make this space, right? I was looking at a lot of art installations about sex work. Like this is overseas. And I realized that the position of artists, yeah. So I think one thing that I was considering all the while was like, what is the difference between activist and artist, right? I think it's a spectrum. So like, when we talk about like, activism, sometimes it may be repelling to people who are not ready to talk about it. But as artists, like there's a huge spectrum. So like, what is my position? Like, what is my position towards this? Like, am I making statements? Like, do I force you to like look at this statement and internalize it, or do I ask questions? Like, they are very different things. Or do I leave a question? Like, do I write a question, like write a sentence halfway and like leave next for you to like fill in? There are a lot of things that I can do as an artist. Yeah. So, but I realized the thing about overseas activism is that they mainly exist in statements. Yeah. So police is never about sex. Just the absolute sex work is work. Yeah. So and these are things that I don't know how people feel about it. Yeah. For me, because I read so much, these are yes, I can assess, but I think for people who don't, I question like how do I fill in that gap? Yeah. So yes, going back to this space. So with regards to how to fill in this gap, right? I realized that interactive like elements are important to this space. So like I don't only want to map out my research, I also want to know how people like feel. Yeah. And yeah, so I realized I was like question mark, what is curation? I don't even know. So we walked around this space and we like kind of vibe this space and we realized that there are a lot of like collagey stuff. So like things exist in the mess. So like careful curation wasn't something that I saw in this space. So I'm like, since I don't know how to curate, I'm gonna mess this space up. Yeah, and then I took reference from the protest art, street art in Hong Kong. Yeah, so this is what it looked like. It has a lot of like post-its and like smiley faces. So it's like, wow, like, we don't get this in Singapore. Yeah, and I really wanted to bring this into double space. Yeah, so this the concept. So I started out with like laying newspaper, and then like I thought about how to write my own newspapers for sex workers. Yeah, that was yes. And because newspaper, right? Yeah, I started off with newspaper clippings, but the interesting thing is I realized that I didn't refer to any incidents that happened in Singapore in my residency here. And I realized that maybe it's because I'm interested in the word fiction. Yeah, so like fiction when talking about social issues. So like when we look at social like practices of comm arts, right? I think like serious is a very big word, like narratives, like people are trying to tell narratives, strong stories of sex, like of the communities. But when you know the community of sex workers is invisible, like how do I even know what story to tell? Like I don't we don't know who is there. So I think the part about invisibility like affects this practice a lot. That's why I turn to fiction, like things that I put out are actually books and novels written about sex workers. And the way they talk about sex workers is not like the realistic way. They use techniques like magical realism. So like likening sex work to creating a movie. Yeah. So I think instantaneously it forces you to shift your perspective to consider like, oh my god, how is sex, like writing a story? I mean there's like foreplay, climax. So it's actually quite similar, but no one ever thought of it as writing a narrative. So I realized that assessing this issue in terms of fiction became actually quite important in my practice. So I put up like fiction novels. So we trace novels and we put it up in the space. Yeah. And then so what I did every day, not every day, what I tried to do in this space was writing fiction. So like knowing that I read like research and scholarly articles what is the fiction that I imagine what is the fiction that I would write about sex workers? Yeah, so that became my practice in the space. I wasn't trying to, like illuminate real stories. Yes. Yeah. Then I think when I start imagining a lot of things, like a lot of very curious things came out lah. Yeah, like what will a sex worker tell her mom before she goes out? So this, I think, I wrote the story "Mommy" about the significance of like checking in with your mother because you don't know whether you'll be back safe lah. So in America, like if things are more dangerous, you don't know if you'll be killed. Yeah. So what are your interactions with your mom as a sex worker? Yeah. Yes. So yeah, and then sorry, it's gonna be a bit like sparse again, my exhibition. So while I was writing fiction, I also had this impulse to put condoms up in the space because like when we talk about invisibility, I think the most visible thing about sex work is condoms. So like everyone kind of use condoms unless you don't lah. Yeah. And condom negotiation is a very big issue among sex workers. It affects the safety and all that. So I chose this. Okay, I didn't really choose this. I started pasting condoms on the wall. Because condoms is not only sex work lah. If you have sex usually and you're not trying to have a baby, use condoms, right? So it's kind of at 7-Eleven, it's not very taboo. Yeah, so that was the first thing I put out in the space. Yeah. And interestingly, even when I put this in the space, like I had this, the first like walk-in, like during our open studio was this guy. And then what he did was he pointed at this wall and he was like, "You guys are doing naughty things, right?" And I was like, "Oh my god!" Okay, then there was this part of me that started flaring up. But then I didn't lah. I was trying to have a chill convo with him. And then he started saying things like, "You see, it's so easy for girls to earn money." And I was like, oh. Like, I think like, yeah, I was trying to control like a lot of myself. But yes, he made a lot of like, yeah, this is the kind of person that you wouldn't see in theater spaces. Yeah. I think because the first thing you do in the theater space is to watch the performance first. Then after you watch the performance, you shoot already. Then you won't say anything. But yeah, as a visual art space, I think like the first thing they walk in and then they see, I get to capture that first reaction, which is something that I don't get to do. Yeah, so this is like memorable for me. I think that something that that popped up, yeah, in this exhibition was also this space where I started. Okay, so what I did was I role played as a sex worker on online forums, and I wanted to see what a sex worker goes through when negotiating. Yeah, so these are the very problematic things. So people are racist, transphobic, like I'm Chinese, I'm Chinese. Then yeah, like what are the first things that they ask? What is the tone that they speak with sex workers? Like some people speak to sex, like they spoke to me like they were asking for, like a picture of the food on the menu. Yeah, so that was, yeah, a lot of it. And then there were very nice people. So I experienced the spectrum. And I realized that, yeah, because this is an unregulated platform in Singapore, so these things are allowed. Yeah. So, and then like, yeah, that was what I was doing every day, just fix role playing, and then writing my interactions on receipts. Yeah. So I think like, I also invited people to write stuff to sex workers on this wall, but it didn't happen. Yeah, I think because this was a bit too loud. Yeah, and people don't really know what to say. I think like, yeah, so actually my wall and her wall is very different because her wall, like people cry, they have a personal connection with crying, but I think my question was, if you don't know a community, what would you say to a community, or how do I make you ready? Like, people don't speak because they are afraid of saying something wrong. Yeah, so how do I curate something that makes people comfortable to, even articulate a sentence about sex work? Yeah, that is still bothering me right now, but yes, it's wall. Yeah, so about articulating what you feel to a community. So we started this interactive wall outside. We left a lipstick outside, and then we wrote like, it started off with both of us writing keywords to our practice. So every day, like, we'll contemplate about like, maybe I'll think about condom negotiation today, and then I'll write condom out there. So this was a mind map for both of us. I realized that when we put the lipstick outside, people started interacting with the wall. Yeah. So the uncle there will tell us, hey, yesterday how got like one, one huge group of people staring at your space for a very long time, and then they wrote a lot of things. Yeah. So this was what happened when we couldn't be in the space. Like, yeah, people actually were still like looking in and writing. And I think that I had words like "do it haram," which is dirty money, that appeared on that wall, which I was very thankful for. Like, oh my god, another voice. Yeah. So I think this became like very cool also. Yeah. Okay. The weird thing was because yeah, this is like this is not really seen in Singapore. Like, it was also drawn from the street art thing lah. I had comments. Okay, there were weird comments lah. Like comments like what China and Taiwan are one. Yeah. So like China and Taiwan are one. Or there are unrelated comments, and then like both of us will laugh at it. And we're like, do we intervene? Yeah, but we decided to rub it off. And then yeah, until now I still wonder what if I didn't, like, and what if I started removing more of my voice from that wall? What will other people feel in? Yeah, that's what I was interested in. Okay, there was also like the comment on "I want to die," right? Because yeah, it was depression and crying. And I realized that you rub that on yes, right? We're horrible lah. Yeah, but I think on the hindsight, I was like, I would have responded to that, like, okay, why do you feel this way, blah blah blah. Because like, okay, recently I went to the wall at the toilet in Aware, and the wall is just filled of things like this. But it's a closed space within Aware, which is very different. So people do talk about their struggles, like I want to die, blah blah blah. But there will be people who answer to that and tell them, like there will be people telling them that things are alright, blah blah blah. Yeah, so I was thinking what happened if I left it there and I trusted other people who came along to respond to it. Yeah. So that was a regret that I didn't get to do this stuff. Yes. Okay. Okay, on that note, I think like the most shocking, not the most shocking, the most so this was something left by someone, not outside but inside. So I think this so how do I say this? So apart from outside, we also allowed people to write in on our walls, but that didn't really happen. But this was something that happened that was very precious to me. Like I think 2 secondary school kids, so they practice drumming upstairs. Yeah, so they come here lah. Then they run in, and then they ask, what is this space? Oh, sex workers, blah blah. And then they left this illustration about what they thought. Okay, so it was like, what goes on a sex worker's mind? And then they were like writing, you are just a lost cause. You are just a waste. Yeah, just shut up, blah blah blah. So they wrote these things on the wall. So yeah, when I saw that, I was like, oh my god, this is because like this is okay. So I was very uncomfortable with it at first because like these are what people think sex workers go through. Yeah. So because the link between like I believe sex workers are like sorry. This statement can mean that sex work undermine like humans, like supporting sex work can undermine the worth of human beings, and that's one interpretation. Another one is that sex workers are usually traumatized. They are survivors of violence, hence they do sex work, and they don't seek mental health. Instead, they do sex work. This is why sex work shouldn't be allowed. But then so I stared at it, and then I responded to it up there. But now when I look at it, like, yeah, I was like, okay, I responded in an angry way, which I didn't like. Like now when I look at it, I was wondering, I was thinking that it's important to know why do people think that sex workers feel this way. Yeah, I think that would be the question for me instead of like trying to rebut it. Yeah, so that was what came out for me. Yeah, but also on this note, right, the kids that came in, like they came in 3 times. Yeah, so actually they look at this, they saw the comment, and I don't know what they feel about it, but whenever they came in afterwards, they started bringing instruments in. Yeah, because they the guitar. Yeah, so they turned this place into like a concert. And then because of that, people actually came in. Yeah, so yeah, things that happen in this space is not only like specific to our teams, but actually there were a lot of non-related conversations that happened. And like there were a lot of casual things that happened in this space, so because we brought in a ukulele, puja, and all that, and none of us play, we just like, yeah, it was just an instinct to bring, like bring unrelated stuff to this space. I think this kind of attracts. Yeah, so I think it's very different when I start a conversation with you and you don't agree on sex work and I don't agree on sex work. Versus I spend some time playing with music, like playing music with you, and then we have this conversation. Sometimes it's very different. Yeah, so like this was like casualness or like other non-related stuff is like important in this space. Yeah, I think on unrelated conversations, there was this old man that came in and then he gave us a 1-hour lecture on parenting. How children should communicate with their parents. Yes. Yeah, 3 of us were just like lectured by him. And then like I kept thinking about the combo is it really unrelated? And then I realized that a lot of like unrelated conversations could happen because they don't know how to talk about what's in the law. And then hence they think as parents they should, talk about parenting first before they hint in about their attitude towards sex workers. But they didn't say no to sex work. Yeah, they didn't react to this at all. Then I'm just like, how can someone like not react to this? Yeah, so until today I still think about this uncle that lectured us for 1 hour. Yeah. But I think what was valuable was beside that uncle, like the uncle actually came in. Yeah. And he was like, yeah, parenting is important. But then he brought back the conversation. He told me that in a village in China, like at first they were very adverse to sex workers, but because sex workers came, the economy like went up. So that was the only like spark that I thought that the parenting is still important. Yeah, that came out in this very long conversation as well. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so these were the these are the interactions that I wanted to share. Like today, these are the very memorable ones. So I think the question now is moving on. How do I where am I? What are my future plans? Yeah, I still don't know. But yeah, so what I did was I was looking at other efforts within Singapore to talk about sexual activism, and of course there's Project X, there's the very activist side of it. So for a long time, even when I was in this residency, I was thinking, should I ask them to come down and see? It's very awkward. It's a very awkward thing because we didn't collaborate. We didn't start as collaborators. They didn't ask me to do this. So it's back to the question to who am I to do this? Yeah. So yeah, there was this long time where I have this very weird relationship with Project X. I will go down and I will attend as an ally. Yeah. But we wouldn't talk about work. Yeah. So I think then I realized just a few days ago when I had a chat with Hui Ling from Drama Box, I realized that you don't always have to collaborate with Project X. I think the question that I should ask myself is what are our differences in practice? So we can advocate for the same thing. We can advocate for sex work, but our approaches and our target audiences can be very different. So this is something that I realized that I needed to figure out. Yeah, so I think but from this residency, something that I realized that why I'm different from Project X is that the target audience that I want to reach may not be sex workers. Yeah, they may be commoners commoners. I'm so sorry. Not commoners. The general public. Sorry, I'm so embarrassing. Yeah, I think I want to reach out to the general public. Okay, so within the general public, of course, I think the more important people that I want to reach out to is clients. So you don't know who's a client. Actually, someone came in and told us they were a client. So they purchased sexual services, and I was so grateful to that person. And then I realized, from the people that I talk online, they are really people embedded within the society, and I don't think sex workers are the only one who should work so hard to ensure their safety. Yeah, so clients wherever they are, I think it's important to create art or engage them in a certain way because as of now, like because project work is really doing work on outreach, like yeah, providing safety, like allowing sex workers to go into trouble, get into trouble to you know like go to them. Yeah, so there is already that part is already done, and I think the part that I'm interested in is the others. Yeah, where are the clients, and whether they are able to engage in you know things like condom negotiation. Like why is it so important to use a condom? I think a lot of guys don't understand somehow. Yes. Yeah, so I was looking at also this work done by Drama Box 10 years ago. So Project X approached them to do a work about sex workers. So it's a forum theatre about sex workers. So what you have to do in the forum theatre is that you present a problem, and then audiences then role play as sex workers to try to solve the problem. And then one issue that they faced then was they didn't think that Singapore was ready for forum theatre because no one had the vocab to speak. Like so, okay, you want me to role play as a sex worker, but what do I say? I know nothing about sex workers. So literacy was a great thing 10 years ago. And I realized 10 years later, maybe also. Yeah. And in this project, I think they did a survey where they asked people, how do you think this performance should be outdoors? Meaning like everyone and anyone who pass by can come. Or do you think there should be some form of gatekeeping? And I think the response then was 80% felt that it should be indoors. Yeah, 80% think that public is not ready for this. But I think like what I sense from this residency is quite different, and I'm quite happy. Yeah. But yeah, I should have done this poll also, but I didn't. Yeah, stupid me. Yes. Yeah. And then yeah, I was looking at another art. Like so, this is based in the UK, and it was confessional theatre on sex workers. Yeah, so this is another initiative, and I think like my approach with fiction, the emphasis on fiction is quite different. I think like you don't have to reveal that you're a sex worker to put out a sex work play. Yeah, and and then this is another initiative in Singapore. Actually, it was during COVID. Yeah, because like the issue with sex work is it transitioned online. Yeah, and they were creating a work about how transactional this work is. And I think, okay, so I watched this show during COVID and I was very triggered. Yeah. And then I went to fight with them. Yeah, I was like, how can you put this out? It's so triggering, don't trigger me, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, and then when I look at it like 3 years later, I realized that it's because of the tone. Like I felt as an audience I was talked down to. And yeah, that became clear why I started why I reacted like that. And also because of this, it kind of informs my practice. I'm still finding my voice. And now I know like, I definitely do not want to talk down to people. But at the same time, when you are reading like all the assault cases online, you get very angry. Yeah. So I think emotional regulation as an artist is very important also. Yes. And yeah, so like when it comes to positioning, I end with this slide. So typically, red umbrellas are used in sex work activism. Yeah. But this umbrella is not red. Yeah. It is yellow and it has red words written on it. Yeah. So I think my position, is not to be an activist, because to be an activist and to speak in that voice, it will repel. And I'm interested in, shifting backwards and throwing out questions instead. Yeah, I realize what I'm interested in doing is not putting out statements, but I want to create a space where it allows people to know how they feel about sex workers. Yeah. So I'm more interested in how you feel about sex workers and why you feel that way, instead of, going there. So I think like there is this huge gap for now, and yeah, this is what I'll be doing maybe in the future. Yay! Okay. Oh my god, yeah. Because we are kids, we have this like reflections. Don't have, but okay, thank you everyone. Thank you. We have 10 minutes for
Anything.
anything.
Okay, just chill, it's fine.
We can just look at each other.
Questions, thoughts, comments, or anything.
Yeah.
Unrelated things is fine.
How long was your residence?
building up the things, there will still people streaming in and out. So yeah.
Just now when you mentioned about you doing some role play, and that is like real conversation with real people.
Yeah.
You as an actor, like did you created certain character or are you playing yourself? You create a certain character during the role play?
Okay, so the role playing started quite late. And I started out with myself. So I had to consider, okay, I will be a sex worker, how will I market myself, blah blah. Yeah, but I didn't dare to role play as a trans woman. Yeah, I didn't dare to role play as a Indian young lady. Yeah, there were certain things I didn't dare to role play with. I didn't dare to role play with a 35-year-old woman. Yeah. Because like the hate, amount of hate received by a Chinese young lady is already this much. Yeah. Sad.
But is that something that in the future you want to explore?
Role play.
I mean, yeah, understand.
Yes, definitely.
Because I feel that, I don't know, like maybe it's for you to share. Like, during the role play, did you feel that you learn much more than just reading?
Yeah, definitely. I learned a lot more. Because the readings are primarily about brothels actually. Like there's a lot of literacy on brothels, but when this is online and unregulated, you kind of get to see you kind of get to see who you're dealing with, like the person that you're dealing with. Like no one will walk into a restaurant and behave this way, but you kind of get to see the real guy, with this persona.
Did you record all the
I screenshotted and then I wrote, I wrote it on the wall.
I think it's interesting that you said that when you role play, you chose very specifically not to play certain characters. But do you think that's also a way of, like, you've already limited or you've strained or you've already censored your research in a way, you know?
Yes,
because you're not allowing actual, like really that kind of conversations to emerge. Do you feel that's
I
a
think
conscious decision?
the
Would
thing
you
was,
expand on it?
yeah, I need to expand on that because when I started out, it was already a lot. Like I think why I didn't go there was because I was already okay. It can be quite upsetting to see a lot of things already. I feel that I need to mentally prepare myself in order to play other roles. Yeah, that was why I didn't. That was the main concern. But in the future, yes, I think I will. Yeah, also it's difficult. I think if I were to role play another character, I think I'm getting more aware of how nice I negotiate or like how, like the tone that I role play with is actually also very important. Yeah, I can be a very nice lady versus like someone who needs money and like someone who's really a sex worker. It's very different. Yeah, if you're role playing for research versus.
I'm not sure if I missed that out, but like I wonder because there are many different social issues that you encounter. So like why sex workers in particular? It's very niche, specific. Yeah.
Social issues. I think I shared that because during COVID, like a lot of people, including like me and my friends, were considering being sex workers. So I looked into this thing. Yeah, that was the main starting point. And then I didn't expect it to go into this. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting how you also mentioned like rather than telling people what your views are, you kind of like open that space for them to share. Yeah, yes. And I think we need more of this.